Your grandmother never wrote it down. She did not need to. The cornbread was always the same size, the potlikker always the right shade of gold, and the table was set before anyone asked. If your people came up from the Carolinas or Georgia and landed in Harlem between 1919 and 1930, you know what that kitchen smelled like on a Tuesday night, not the version food magazines sell now, not the plated garnish version with a $15 price tag, the real food, the food that kept the family alive in a 3-room apartment on Lenox Avenue when the rent was due and the grocer cut off credit. Number 14 on this list was the meal you made when you had nothing left but flour and vinegar, and somehow it held. Number 7 was a part of the animal most people today have never seen on a plate. Hit subscribe because this goes deeper than any cookbook. Here are 30 foods black families actually ate in 1920s Harlem. Number 30, stewed neck bones with white potatoes. A Harlem landlord might raise the rent without warning, but neck bones stayed cheap year-round. They came from the back of the butcher case, wrapped in wax paper, sold by the pound for next to nothing. A woman browned them in a heavy pot, added water, salt, black pepper, and a bay leaf, and let the whole thing go low and slow until the meat pulled off with 2 fingers and the marrow dissolved into the broth. White potatoes went in near the end, cut rough, skins left on. The broth turned cloudy and rich. One pot fed a family of 5 for 2 nights. Neck bones were not a choice anyone celebrated. They were a certainty you could count on when nothing else was guaranteed. Number 29, syrup sandwich. 2 slices of white bread with cane syrup poured between them. That was the whole thing. No butter, no peanut butter, no jam, nothing else. The syrup soaked into the soft bread and turned it sticky and sweet and heavy enough to feel like a meal, even though it contained almost nothing of nutritional value. Children carried syrup sandwiches to school wrapped in wax paper, and by lunchtime, the paper was stuck to the bread, and the bread was stuck to itself, and the whole thing was a sweet, collapsed mess that you ate anyway. It was not a meal anyone bragged about or brought up at the dinner table. But on a morning when the icebox held nothing and payday was still 3 days out, a syrup sandwich meant a child left for school with something warm in her stomach. That counted for everything. Number 28, molasses and cornbread. There were nights in Harlem when dinner was exactly this and nothing more. A square of cornbread, still warm from the oven, broken open on the plate with blackstrap molasses, poured over the top until it pooled in every crack and soaked into the crumb. Blackstrap was the cheapest sweetener on the grocery shelf and the darkest in color. It had a bitter, mineral edge that refined white sugar never carried, a taste that sat at the back of your throat and stayed there. Children ate it and called it dessert. Adults ate it and called it Tuesday. Nobody called it poverty because everybody on the block was eating the same thing at the same hour. The cornbread was never sweet. That came later when northern bakeries added sugar and turned it into cake. Number 27, beef marrow bones roasted in the oven. The butcher gave these away or sold them for pennies because they were not a cut anybody with money wanted. A Harlem cook placed them upright in a baking pan and roasted them until the marrow inside turned soft and golden and started to bubble at the edges. You scooped the marrow out with a small spoon or the handle of a knife and spread it on a piece of bread with a pinch of salt. It was rich, fatty, and deeply savory, the kind of flavor that high-end restaurants now charge $30 for. In the 1920s, it was what you ate when there was nothing else in the kitchen that qualified as dinner. Number 26, oatmeal with blackstrap molasses. Breakfast in a Harlem apartment often came down to whatever was cheap and hot and fast. Oatmeal was all 3. A pot of water, a handful of oats, A few minutes on the stove, and a heavy pour of blackstrap molasses stirred in until the whole bowl turned dark brown and smelled like iron and sugar. No milk. Milk cost money. The molasses was the flavor and the sweetener and the reason a child could sit through a morning of school without losing focus. Oatmeal with molasses was breakfast for the people who could not afford breakfast, as the magazines described it. Number 25, fried butterfish. Butterfish was small, flat, oily fish that showed up at the Harlem fish markets in spring and summer for less than almost any other catch. A woman bought a pound of them, dusted each one in seasoned cornmeal, and fried them whole in a skillet with hot lard. They cooked fast because they were thin. The skin crisped up tight against the flesh, and the meat inside was so buttery and rich it barely needed salt. You ate butterfish with your hands, pulling the meat off the delicate spine in small, careful strips. Children learned to eat around fish bones at this table. Number 24, dandelion greens with hot bacon dressing. Before dandelion greens became a menu item at farm-to-table restaurants, they were free food growing in vacant lots and along sidewalk cracks in Harlem. Women picked them in spring, when the leaves were young and tender and had not yet turned bitter. The greens were washed, torn into pieces, and dressed with hot bacon fat, a splash of vinegar, salt, and pepper. The fat wilted the greens on contact and turned them glossy and dark. The vinegar cut through the richness. A bowl of dandelion greens cost nothing but the time it took to pick them and the few cents for the bacon. Number 23, pan-fried herring roe. In spring, the fish markets along 8th Avenue sold herring roe by the scoopful for next to nothing. A small sack of eggs, no bigger than a thumb, held more protein than a full plate of grits, with a fraction of the volume. You dredged it in flour, salt, and pepper, then fried it quick in a hot skillet with a little lard until the outside turned golden brown and the inside stayed creamy and dense. It popped faintly between your teeth when you bit down. Children either loved it or refused to sit at the table when it appeared. There was no middle ground with herring roe. It disappeared from most Harlem kitchens by the 1950s, replaced by cheaper canned fish that required no cleaning, no timing, and no courage. Number 22, salt mackerel boiled with potatoes. Salt mackerel came packed in wooden boxes and sat on the shelf without spoiling for months. Before cooking, you soaked the fish overnight in cold water to pull the worst of the salt out. The next morning, you put the fish in a pot with peeled white potatoes, covered them in fresh water, and boiled everything together until the potatoes were soft and the fish flaked apart at the touch of a fork. You drained the pot, laid the fish and potatoes on a plate, and poured melted butter or bacon grease over the whole thing. It was plain and salty and deeply filling. Number 21, mashed turnips with butter. Turnips were a root vegetable that cost next to nothing and kept in a cool, dry place for weeks without spoiling. A Harlem cook peeled them, cubed them rough, boiled them in salted water until they were soft enough to crush with a fork, then mashed them smooth with a piece of butter, salt, and pepper. The result was pale, slightly bitter, and filling in a way that potatoes could not always match. Turnips showed up on the table when potatoes were too dear or when the grocer had run out of them entirely. Children complained about the taste. Adults ate them without comment and without offering an alternative because there was none. Number 20, sweet potato pudding, not sweet potato pie, pudding. The difference mattered to every woman who made it. Pudding was rougher, denser, baked in a deep cast iron pan without a crust of any kind. Grated raw sweet potato, beaten eggs, milk, nutmeg, cinnamon, a generous pour of cane syrup, and sometimes a handful of dark raisins. It came out of the oven, dark brown and heavy, custardy and trembling in the center, firm at the edges where the heat had caramelized the sugars. You cut it in thick squares and ate it warm or cold, and it kept for 3 days in the icebox without turning. Churchwomen brought sweet potato pudding to every gathering in a covered pan balanced on one arm. Nobody asked for anyone else's recipe because every woman had her own version and considered every other version inferior to what she made. Here is what the history books leave out about 1920s Harlem. The Great Migration did not just move people, it moved kitchens. Families arriving from South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Virginia, and Mississippi carried recipes in their memories that had survived 200 years of forced labor, Reconstruction, and Jim Crow. When those families arrived in a 3-room apartment on 133rd Street with no money and no connections, the kitchen was the first room that worked. It was the room that made the apartment a home. It was where a mother turned a 25-cent ham bone into 4 meals without complaint. The foods on this list are not nostalgia. They are evidence. Evidence that survival in Harlem was engineered one pot at a time by women whose names never made it into a single cookbook. Number 19, fried plantains with salt. Most people today associate fried plantains with Caribbean cooking, but in 1920s, Harlem, the line between Southern black food and Caribbean food, was thinner than the walls between apartments. Harlem in the 1920s was not one community. It was several, layered on top of each other, block by block. Families from Jamaica, Trinidad, Barbados, and the American South lived on the same streets, shopped at the same markets, and borrowed from each other without formality or ceremony. Plantains showed up at the push carts on Lenox Avenue alongside sweet potatoes and yams, and a woman from Alabama who had never seen one before learned to slice and fry them the same way her Jamaican neighbor did, in hot oil until the edges caramelized and turned dark and the centers went soft and sweet. A sprinkle of coarse salt was the only seasoning required. The plantain sat at the crossroads between savory and sweet, between African American and Afro-Caribbean, between a side dish and a snack you ate standing at the counter. Nobody drew those lines at the kitchen table. You ate what was in front of you, and if the woman next door showed you something new that was cheap and filling and good, you added it to your kitchen without asking permission or where it came from. That quiet exchange between cultures, happening every day over a shared stove in a building with thin walls, is one of the least documented and most important things that happened in 1920s Harlem. It happened in grocery bags and grease-stained pans and conversations held in hallways while something fried in the kitchen behind the door. The cookbooks of the era missed it entirely. The food remembers. Number 18, Johnny cake. Johnny cake was cornmeal, water, a pinch of salt, and nothing else, mixed into a thick batter, dropped by the spoonful onto a hot greased griddle, and cooked until both sides turned golden and the inside stayed dense and slightly gritty. It was not a pancake. It was heavier, coarser, and made without flour, eggs, or milk. Johnny cake had been made in some form since before the country existed, and it arrived in Harlem with families who carried it from the Carolinas and Virginia. It showed up at breakfast next to whatever else was on the stove and disappeared from the plate before anything else. Number 17, egg sandwich with hot sauce. When there was nothing else in the kitchen, there were eggs. A woman scrambled 2 eggs in a skillet with a little lard, salt, and pepper, piled them onto a slice of white bread, hit them with hot sauce, folded the bread in half, and handed it to whoever was hungriest. An egg sandwich Took 3 minutes. It cost almost nothing. It was not a meal anyone planned. It was the meal that happened when planning had failed and the children were already standing in the kitchen asking what was for dinner. Hot sauce made it feel like something more than desperation on bread. Number 16, pan gravy on white bread. After frying any piece of meat, a Harlem cook never washed the skillet. She added a spoonful of flour to the drippings, stirred it until it darkened, then poured in water or milk and scraped the bottom of the pan until the gravy came together, thick and brown and savory. That gravy went over white bread, open-faced, on a plate. It was a meal made entirely from what was left behind by another meal. Some families called it poor man gravy. Others had no name for it at all, because naming it would mean admitting that dinner was drippings and flour on bread. It was, and it tasted better than it had any right to. Number 15, cowfoot soup. Cow feet were sold at the Harlem butcher shops alongside every other cut that wealthier customers ignored. They were heavy, bony, and covered in a thick layer of cartilage that required hours of slow simmering before it softened. But once the collagen broke down, the broth turned thick and gelatinous, almost sticky on the lips, with a depth of flavor that no lean cut could come close to matching. A cook added onion, garlic, white beans, carrots, and whatever greens she had on hand. The soup set up like jelly when it cooled in the icebox. Reheated the next day, it was even richer, as if the flavors had spent the night getting to know each other. Number 14, vinegar pie. This was the pie a woman made when every ingredient that makes a proper dessert was out of reach. No fruit, no chocolate, no coconut, no vanilla extract, which cost more per ounce than the flour it flavored. What remained in the pantry was flour, a cup of sugar, a splash of apple cider vinegar, water, a beaten egg, and enough lard and flour to press a rough crust into the pan by hand. The vinegar reacted with the sugar during baking to create an acid-sweet filling that set up like a thin custard, pale and trembling and tart enough to make your eyes narrow on the first bite. Nobody compared it to lemon meringue. Nobody called it a substitute for anything else. It was its own thing entirely, born from necessity and perfected through repetition by women who had made it so many times their hands moved without thinking. The ratio of sugar to vinegar was calibrated by years of memory. The crust rolled on a floured counter that had been wiped clean 1,000 times before. The children who ate vinegar pie never asked why there were no strawberries on the table. They never asked because they did not know strawberries were supposed to be an option. That is what poverty does to dessert. It narrows the frame until what you have becomes everything there is. A woman on 135th Street set a vinegar pie on the table on a Wednesday evening, and nobody sitting at that table thought any less of it or of her. It was sweet. It was warm. It was made by someone who refused to let the evening end without offering something that felt like a gift, however small. That was enough. That was always enough. Number 13, baked sweet potatoes. No recipe required, no technique worth naming. A sweet potato, washed under the faucet, dried with a towel, and placed directly on the oven rack. Baked until the skin split open and the natural sugars leaked out and burned against the hot metal, filling the kitchen with a caramel smell that could not be faked with any seasoning. The flesh inside turned deep orange and soft enough to eat with a spoon. It did not need butter, though butter was added anyway on the rare occasion there was any. Children ate them after school, holding the hot skin with a folded dish towel, scooping out the middle with their fingers. In a Harlem kitchen where snacks did not exist as a concept, a baked sweet potato was the closest thing to one. Number 12, pinto beans with cornbread. A pound of dried pinto beans cost almost nothing and fed a family for 2 days. You soaked them overnight, then cooked them slow in a pot with water, an onion, salt, and whatever piece of seasoning meat was available. By evening, the beans had turned soft and the liquid had thickened into a brown, savory broth that clung to the spoon. Cornbread went alongside, baked in a skillet, and you crumbled it into the beans or used it to scoop them up. No one served this on a plate. It came in a bowl, eaten with a spoon, at a table where no one said much because everyone was too busy eating. Number 11, fried smelt. Smelt were tiny silver fish that showed up at the Harlem fish markets in winter and early spring, sold by the pound for almost nothing. They were so small you ate them whole, bones and all. A woman dredged a handful in seasoned cornmeal, dropped them into a skillet of hot lard, and fried them until they curled up and turned golden and crunchy from head to tail. You ate them with your fingers like popcorn, pulling them out of a paper-lined bowl one at a time. Children fought over the crispiest ones. A pound of smelt fed a table of 4 as a side dish, and 2 pounds made it the main event on a Friday night. Number 10, rice and milk with sugar. This was a children's meal, served warm, usually at the end of a long day when there was nothing else in the kitchen to offer. Leftover white rice from dinner, reheated in a small pot with milk and a spoonful of sugar, stirred slow until it turned creamy and thick and faintly sweet. Some mothers added a pinch of nutmeg or cinnamon if they had it. Others added nothing at all. It was not a recipe anyone wrote down or spoke about with pride. It was an act of making comfort from what was already there, from what was left. Rice and milk put a child to sleep faster than any story and cost less than anything else that could do the job. Something worth saying plainly. The women who cooked these meals in 1920s, Harlem, were not chefs. They were not celebrated. Most of them worked as domestics in white households during the day, cooking food for other families that they would never eat themselves. Then they came home and cooked again. 2 kitchens every day, one where they followed instructions, one where they made the rules. The food they made at home, the food on this list, was cooked under conditions that would break a modern restaurant kitchen. 1 burner, no ventilation, shared ice, a budget that allowed no waste. None of them received credit. Most of them were never photographed in their own kitchens. The recipes survived anyway, carried in hands and habits, not in writing. Number 9, cornbread cooked in bacon grease. Not cornbread made with butter, not cornbread sweetened with sugar the way northern bakeries later insisted on doing. Cornbread made with cornmeal, salt, 1 egg, buttermilk, and a cast iron skillet heated until the saved bacon grease smoked the instant you poured in the batter. The bottom crust formed on contact, dark and crunchy, tasting like salt and rendered pork fat. You flipped the whole disc out onto a plate and sliced it like a pie. Every apartment had a skillet seasoned black by years of exactly this. Washing that skillet with soap was grounds for an argument that could outlast a marriage. Number 8, vegetable soup made from bone stock. Nothing in a Harlem kitchen went to waste. Chicken bones, beef bones, ham bones, any bone from any meal saved in a pot of water with an onion and a bay leaf and simmered until the liquid turned dark and rich. Into that broth went whatever vegetables were available. A carrot past its prime, a potato starting to sprout, the tough outer leaves of cabbage, a handful of dried beans. The soup changed every time it was made because it was never made from a recipe. It was made from whatever the kitchen had left to give. 1 pot lasted 3 days and tasted different on each one. Number 7, chicken necks fried crispy. The chicken neck was the cheapest part of the bird, a bony tube of skin and small scraps of dark meat that the butcher sold by the bag for a few cents a pound. Most customers walked past them without a second look. In a Harlem kitchen, a woman bought a full bag, seasoned them generously with salt, pepper, and a touch of garlic powder, rolled each one in flour, and fried them in deep lard until the skin pulled tight against the bone and shattered when you bit through it. The meat tucked between the vertebrae was dark, dense, and more intensely flavored than any breast or thigh from the same bird. You ate chicken necks by holding one in both hands and gnawing along its full length, turning it like corn on the cob, working every scrap of meat off the bone with your front teeth. There was no elegant way to do it, and nobody tried. A plate of fried chicken necks was a Friday night meal that cost less than a single chicken breast and produced more satisfaction per penny than almost anything else a Harlem cook could put on the table. Children ate them without protest because the crunch was impossible to resist, and the adults ate them because they understood what it meant to feed a family of 5 on 2 cents a pound instead of 20. After dinner, the picked clean bones went back into the stock pot for tomorrow's broth. Nothing was lost, nothing was thrown away. The chicken gave everything it had from neck to feet, and a Harlem kitchen accepted every part of that offering without apology, without embarrassment, and without waste. Number 6, stewed lima beans with onion. Dried lima beans soaked overnight in cold water, then cooked slow in a pot with a chopped onion, salt, pepper, and a bay leaf until they turned creamy and soft and the liquid thickened into a pale, starchy broth. No meat. Some weeks there was no meat to add, and the beans stood alone. They were bland without help, but a heavy hand of black pepper and a splash of vinegar at the table brought them to life. A bowl of stewed limas with a piece of cornbread was a full meal that cost less than a nickel to prepare. Number 5, baked apples with cinnamon. When fresh fruit was in season and cheap enough to buy from the push carts, a Harlem cook cored a few apples, filled the centers with sugar and cinnamon, placed them in a baking pan with a little water, and baked them until they collapsed and the juices pooled around them dark and syrupy. The skin wrinkled and pulled away from the flesh, and the inside turned soft enough to eat with a spoon. Baked apples were dessert for a family that could not afford pie crust or filling or the time to roll out dough. They were sweet, warm, and simple enough for a child to remember making 50 years later. Number 4, grits with butter and salt. Not shrimp and grits, not cheese, grits. Not grits with gravy or greens or anything piled on top to dress them up. Just grits. White corn grits, cooked slow in water on the back burner until they were thick and smooth and heavy enough to hold a spoon upright, finished with a knob of butter melting in the center and a generous hand of salt. That was breakfast in Harlem more mornings than anyone alive could count. The simplicity was the entire point. Grits required no skill, no planning, no money, and no explanation. A 5-pound bag lasted weeks. Every child on the block knew the taste before they could name it. Number 3, blackstrap molasses stirred into warm milk. This was given to children at bedtime, and most of them never forgot it. A glass of warm milk with a heaping spoonful of blackstrap molasses stirred in until it turned a pale brown and smelled like iron and sugar in the end of the day. It was sweet and earthy and heavy enough to put a restless child to sleep inside half an hour. Mothers called it a tonic. It was cheaper than any medicine a doctor could prescribe and more reliable than most. Blackstrap molasses carried calcium and potassium in amounts no one bothered to measure in the 1920s, but that nutritionists have since confirmed was significant. The children who drank it did not know any of that. They just knew that when the warm glass showed up, the day was over and tomorrow was coming. Number 2, yellow squash fried in cornmeal. Summer squash, showed up at the Harlem push carts from June through September, sold cheap because it grew fast and bruised easily and needed to move before it turned soft. A cook sliced it into thick rounds, salted them, let them sit to draw out the water, dredged each one in cornmeal, and fried the slices in hot lard until the coating turned golden and crunchy, and the squash inside went tender and faintly sweet. You ate them straight off the plate, still hot, one round at a time. Fried squash showed up beside every piece of fried fish and every bowl of beans that the summer months produced. Number 1, the rent party plate. When the rent was due and the money was short, someone on the block threw a party. You paid a quarter at the door, the music was loud, and in the kitchen, a woman sold plates of food to keep the landlord from putting the family on the street. The plate changed every Saturday night. It might be fried chicken or smothered pork chops or a pile of rice with gravy and a side of greens. It was not one dish, it was a table, and that table was the reason a family stayed in their apartment for one more month. The rent party plate was Harlem at its most honest, a community feeding itself to keep itself whole. The food changed, but the purpose never did. Poke salad was not a dish for the uninformed. The pokeweed plant grows wild across the American South, tall, purple-stemmed, with dark berries that can poison a child and leaves that will make an adult violently sick if prepared wrong. But if you know, picked young, before the toxins concentrate in the stems, boiled hard in one pot of water, that water completely poured off, covered with fresh water and boiled again, sometimes a third time. What came out was soft, slightly bitter, deeply green, then fried in a cast iron skillet with fat back until the edges crisped. The food with roots, culinary, history, database documents pokeweed as a traditional Southern survival food prepared by boiling multiple times to remove toxicity, a technique rooted in indigenous Southern knowledge that Black communities adapted and passed orally for generations. In the hungry stretch of late winter, poke salad stood between a family and an empty table. You did not learn this from a book. You learned it standing beside someone who knew exactly how many times the water had to change. That person is gone from most households now. She put them right in the ashes, not near the fire, directly in the gray-white coals that pulsed after the wood burned down. Red rice carried flavors of West Africa across the Atlantic, surviving through generations who kept the tradition alive. The dish combined long-grain rice with tomatoes, onions, and rendered bacon fat, the tomatoes staining every grain deep red. Some families added smoked sausage or bacon, while others relied solely on fat for richness. The rice cooked slowly until each grain absorbed tomatoes' tang and pork's smokiness. It was served as side dish or meal unto itself, substantial enough to satisfy without expensive protein. Red rice appeared at church suppers and reunions, each cook's version slightly different based on handed-down techniques. The dish connected Black families to Gula traditions and coastal cooking predating their American experience. Red rice was memory made edible, heritage preserved one pot at a time. Long before the smokehouse went quiet, there was a sound on the streets of New Orleans that meant breakfast, a woman's voice in French Creole calling out over a basket balanced on her head, hot rice fritters rising from a cold brazier. Callous were the original banned soul food. Deep-fried rice cakes made from leftover rice, flour, eggs, sugar, and nutmeg, sold by Black women in the French Quarter since the 1700s, when the Code Noir gave enslaved women Sundays off to sell food and earn their own money. By the 1920s, vending ordinances pushed the women off the streets. The city wanted cleaner sidewalks. What it erased was a tradition connecting back to West African rice culture, the Wolof and Mandinka peoples who cultivated the grain that built Louisiana's economy. Rose Nicole, the most famous calla seller, purchased her freedom with fritter money earned outside Sunday Mass. By the 1930s, the calla women were gone. The sound went with them. Potlikker was the dark, trembling broth left in the bottom of the pot after the greens had cooked down. Collards or turnips simmered all afternoon with a ham bone. Nobody poured it out. That liquid held vitamins and minerals that nothing else on the table could match in winter. You tore cornbread and held it over the pot until it could absorb no more, then ate it standing. Chef Lachelle Cunningham, writing in the Minnesota Spokesman Recorder in 2026, called Potlikker the teacher, the nutrient-rich broth that people who didn't understand threw away. The West African tradition of saving and drinking cooking liquid crossed the ocean and landed in every black kitchen in the South. Her hands knew what to do with it. The ones who came after her, who grew up with store-bought broth and running water, mostly stopped knowing. Chitterlings carried the weight of history in every bite, transforming pig intestines into a dish defining celebration and survival. Cleaning them required hours of labor, scrubbing and rinsing until ready for the pot. Women simmered them with onions, vinegar, and red pepper until tender, the aroma filling homes for blocks. The smell announced something special was being prepared, usually for holidays or Sunday dinners. Black families understood chitterlings represented making treasure from what others discarded. The texture was chewy and rich, eaten with hot sauce and vinegar to cut through heaviness. Children either loved them or learned to, watching elders savor each piece. Preparing chitterlings was knowledge passed between generations, a skill that could not be learned from books. They were survival food elevated to sacred status. When the first frost hit and the persimmons went soft on the branch, the brewing started. Persimmon beer was older than Prohibition, older than the country, rooted in indigenous American and West African fermentation traditions. Black families gathered the fruit after cold sweetened it, mashed it with wheat, bran, molasses, and water, then let it ferment in crocks until it turned fizzy and tart. The flavor was earthy, sweet, with a tang that caught the back of your throat. The Volstead Act banned beer production at home, even while allowing fruit wine. Persimmon beer fell on the wrong side of that line. What had been a seasonal ritual tied to the rhythm of the land became criminal overnight. Crocks got buried behind barns and hen houses. The recipe got whispered instead of spoken aloud. When the old ones who remembered the right ratio of fruit to grain finally passed on, nobody could ask them to say it one more time. The beer with them. Stewed tomatoes and okra was a summer dish that started on the vine and ended in the pot the same day. In July, when both came in together, Black families across the Deep South picked them at first light and had them cooking before the heat got bad. Okra's name derives from the Igbo word okwuru. It arrived in the American South through West African captives who carried seeds and knowledge of its cultivation across the Middle Passage. Combined with dead ripe tomatoes cut into rough chunks, okra's natural thickening power turned the liquid into a glossy, rich stew that needed nothing more than salt, pepper, and cornbread to soak it up. The technique mirrors traditional West African one-pot stew making, where a single vessel produced a complete meal from whatever the garden gave that day. By September, the overflow went into jars and came back out in January when the garden was frozen solid. The knowledge of how long to cook it, how much heat, it lives nowhere written down. Molasses bread provided sweetness and sustenance when refined sugar was beyond reach for most Black families. The loaves were dense and dark, sweetened with blackstrap molasses that added minerals along with its deep sweetness. Women mixed dough with cornmeal or wheat flour depending on availability, adding ginger or cinnamon when the pantry allowed. The bread baked slowly in wood-fired ovens, emerging with dark crust that crackled when sliced. Children spread it with butter or ate it plain, savoring rich flavor, satisfying sweet cravings without expensive ingredients. Molasses bread lasted well, staying moist for days in covered crocks. Families ate it for breakfast, packed it in lunch pails, and served it with supper. The bread represented making do beautifully, creating something special from the most affordable sweetener. In the 1920s, when Southern game laws tightened on rural Black communities, rabbit hunting moved to the dark hours. The stew was not fancy: quartered rabbit, browned in lard, simmered with onions, potatoes, and herbs that grew along the fence line. But it held defiance in every bite. Rabbits bred fast and lived everywhere, the most democratic protein in the South. A box trap from scrap wood and a handful of clover would do. But regulations required licenses, and in Alabama and Mississippi, wardens used those laws to control Black movement off tenant farms. A man caught with a rabbit and no license could be jailed, which often meant convict labor. So the hunts moved to moonless nights, traps set where no warden walked. The women who cooked that stew never asked where the rabbit came from. They seasoned the pot and fed the household. That silence was his own kind of grace. Crackling bread held the full genius of the 1920s, Black kitchen in a single pan. When hog killing season came in November, the pig's skin was rendered low and slow in a cast iron pot, the fat melting off until the pieces shrank and crisped into dark amber cracklings. What came out wasn't a scrap, it was the next ingredient. Those cracklings went straight into coarse ground cornmeal batter with salt and just enough buttermilk to hold it, poured into the still warm skillet and baked until the top set and the bottom darkened. PMC historical records confirm crackling bread as a deep South Black staple made from the pots the butcher reserved for the people who lived in the quarters. The cut nobody wanted became the bread that fed the whole family through winter. She never measured the cracklings. She poured until the color of the batter looked right. It always looked right to her. Pickled pigs' feet were testament to preservation and refusing to waste any part of the hog. After butchering, the feet were cleaned, boiled until tender, then packed into crocks with spiced vinegar, bay leaves, and peppercorns. The pickling preserved them for months without refrigeration, providing protein whenever needed. The texture was gelatinous, the meat tender against soft cartilage surrounding each bone. Black families ate them cold from the jar as snack or alongside other dishes. The vinegar's tang cut through richness, making them surprisingly refreshing. Children often found them strange at first, but grew to crave that combination of textures. Pickled pig's feet appeared at gatherings and holidays, pulled from pantries where they had been waiting. They represented foresight, preparing today for tomorrow's hunger. The smell hit you before you saw the table. Sweet, sharp, slightly chemical, like summer fruit soaking in something your mother told you not to touch. Bathtub gin watermelon was the open secret of every rent party and backyard gathering in the 1920s. You cut a plug from a whole watermelon, poured in homemade gin until the fruit absorbed it, replaced the plug, and let it sit overnight. The gin seeped into the flesh, turning each bite cool and burning at the same time. You learned by watching your uncle work the knife on a Saturday afternoon while the yard filled with people who all knew the melon was not just melon. The gin was rough, juniper oil, and grain alcohol, but the fruit softened it, made it sweet enough to forget you were breaking. Two laws at once, possession and distribution. That was what they called sharing a slice with your neighbor. Chow chow was how the end of the garden became the flavor of winter. As the first cold nights threatened everything, still on the vine, green tomatoes not yet ripe, a last round of okra pods, cabbage that had bolted, everything went into the relish pot. Chopped fine, combined with vinegar, salt, mustard seed, and red pepper, packed into glass jars and sealed. The African American registry documents chow chow as a traditional African American condiment created in the South, pickled vegetable relish used to top field peas, rice, beans, any plate that needed brightness to cut through the weight of fatback and cornbread. Every household's version was different. The ratio of vinegar to pepper to sugar shifted with every cook, every year, every jar, tasted and adjusted until it was right, never measured, never written. When she died, that ratio went with her. In the 1920s, a head of cabbage cost 3 cents. Oxtail stew was Sunday dinner at its finest, turning bony cuts into something approaching luxury. Butchers sold oxtails cheaply because white customers wanted nothing to do with them. The tails were browned in cast iron until caramelized, then braised for hours with tomatoes, onions, and root vegetables. Long cooking released collagen from bones, creating gravy so rich it coated the spoon. The meat became impossibly tender, falling away at the slightest touch. Families served oxtail stew over rice, the grain soaking up every drop of that precious liquid. The marrow inside the bones was considered a delicacy sucked out by those who knew its value. Oxtail stew taught that patience and low heat could transform humble cuts into something magnificent, feeding families who could not afford finer meat. You could always tell which smokehouse had a corn liquor ham inside because the air smelled different, sweeter, sharper, like wood smoke, and something forbidden underneath. Corn liquor cured ham was the oldest preservation secret in the rural Black South, passed between households that understood moonshine was not just for drinking. The ham was rubbed with salt, brown sugar, and red pepper, then mopped with corn liquor before hanging in the smokehouse for weeks. The alcohol drew moisture out while the sugar and smoke sealed the outside, a flavor no store-bought cure could match. When Prohibition made distilling a federal crime, every smokehouse became evidence. Agents and sheriffs, sometimes working alongside Klan-affiliated enforcement leagues, targeted black farms first. The hams vanished from their hooks. The stills went deeper into the hollows, and a preservation method older than the country that banned it slowly went silent. But before the garden gave anything, before the beans had soaked overnight, there was couscous, and it kept people moving when nothing else was in the house. A Senegambian dish documented in WPA slave narratives from Texas, couscous traveled across the Atlantic in the memory of West African captives who had eaten a version of it for generations. Coarse cornmeal poured into a dry, hot iron skillet with a little lard, stirred until it browned and formed a crust, then scraped up and served with cane syrup poured over the top. The result was crispy in patches, soft underneath, sweet from the syrup, smoky from the iron, a breakfast that cost almost nothing and tasted like something worth waking early for. In the 1920s, cane syrup was the cheapest sweetener in rural Louisiana and Mississippi. Nobody makes couscous anymore. The woman who made it every morning is not here to make it. Fried okra was summer's gift, turning green pods into crispy bites that disappeared as fast as they hit the plate. The okra was sliced into rounds, tossed in seasoned cornmeal, and fried in hot lard until golden and crunchy. The coating sealed in moisture while eliminating sliminess that put some people off. Each piece delivered satisfying crunch, followed by tender vegetable within, families grew okra in gardens because it thrived in southern heat when other vegetables struggled. Children picked pods in the morning before sun grew too hot, bringing baskets where mothers waited with cornmeal ready. Fried okra was eaten immediately, standing at the stove between batches because it never lasted long enough to reach the table. The dish was free food transformed into something everyone craved. She set up before dawn, oil heating in cast iron, cornmeal in a paper sack, catfish fillets on yesterday's newspaper. By the time the sun hit the porch, there would be a line. Selling fried fish from the front porch was how black women fed neighborhoods and paid rent through the 1920s, where Jim Crow shut them out of wage work. 15 cents bought a plate, fish, coleslaw, cornbread, hot sauce. No license, no sign, just the smell pulling people from 3 blocks away. By mid-decade, cities like Philadelphia required vendors to obtain licenses and submit to inspections, with fines up to $50, a fortune for a woman earning pennies per plate. The rules landed hardest on black women who had built entire economies from their kitchens. Some paid the fee and kept frying. Others moved indoors, sold quieter. The plates got smaller. The lines got shorter. One morning, the porch was just a porch again. Ash-roasted sweet potatoes were documented in WPA Federal Writers Project narratives. Betty Curlett of Arkansas told interviewers she roasted potatoes on hot ashes in a wash pot, a technique rooted in West and Central African open-fire cooking, where food placed directly on coals sealed inside its own moisture. No pan, no rack, no oven. Just ash cooled to the right point and the judgment to know the difference. After 45 minutes, the skin came off in your hands, charred and paper thin, and the flesh was dense and sweet in a way no oven-baked version ever matched. Caramelized from the inside out by heat coming from every direction. The children who watched her do it grew up and couldn't explain how she always knew when they were ready. She never checked them more than once. Neck bones and rice was weeknight supper, stretching a few cents worth of bones into a meal feeding the whole family. Butchers practically gave away neck bones, considering them worthless scraps. Black families knew better, recognizing rich flavor hiding in those bony cuts. The bones were browned until caramelized, then simmered for hours with onions, garlic, and bay leaves until meat fell away tender. The broth turned silky from rendered collagen, creating natural gravy without flour. Served over rice, the dish provided protein, starch, and deep satisfaction. Children learned to work around bones, finding every scrap and savoring marrow within. Neck bones and rice taught that value existed where others saw none, that patience revealed treasures in humble ingredients. The dish fed families through lean times. When money ran to nothing, dried pinto beans were what kept families alive. In 1922, a pound cost under 5 cents, enough to feed 6 people if you started them before sunrise. You picked through them the night before, soaked them cold, then in the morning added a ham bone or fatback and a halved onion and left them alone until noon. Salt went in only at the end. Salt early made the skins tough, and a tough bean was a ruined pot. That rule was unwritten, passed by watching her fish one out and press it between her fingers to check. Sharecropper households in Mississippi and Arkansas relied on dried field peas and beans through most of the lean season, stretching a single pot across 2 days by adding water and reheating. Nobody who grew up in these kitchens forgets the smell, low and smoky and dense, filling every room before anyone else woke. 30 foods, not one came from a restaurant, not one required a cookbook. Everyone was made by hand in a kitchen smaller than most modern closets, by a woman who had already cooked once that day for someone else. That was 1920s Harlem. Try the cornbread in bacon grease this week, or the sweet potato pudding, the real one, no crust, or the Johnny cake, just cornmeal and water and salt and a hot griddle. Drop a comment and tell us which one your family still makes.